The courtroom air was heavy, every sound magnified in the stillness. The soft shuffle of papers, the clicking of polished shoes on marble, the deliberate clearing of throats, it all felt louder than thunder to Eleanor Hayes. She sat at the defendant's table, her thin shoulders hunched forward, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the wooden surface. She tried not to look up, tried not to meet the eyes of the dozens of strangers watching her, some curious, some mocking, but she could feel their stares cutting through her like sharp glass. Her father, Marcus Hayes, sat a row behind her. His uniform shirt bore faint bleach stains, the kind that never came out no matter how many times it was washed, and his hands were calloused from years of hard labor. He leaned forward in his seat, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on his daughter. He knew fear when he saw it. He had seen it in himself plenty of times. But what gutted him was the shame he thought she felt. Shame that the only person she had in her corner was her father, a janitor who mopped floors in this very courthouse at night. On the other side of the room, Victor Langford, the CEO, sat tall, every inch of him wrapped in expensive fabric and entitlement. His presence filled the space like a storm cloud. A man used to commanding boardrooms, senators, and judges, he didn't even look at Eleanor directly. To him, she was nothing more than an inconvenience, a name on a document, an obstacle to crush with the weight of his empire. His lawyers buzzed around him like wasps, whispering strategy, smirking as if the trial had already been won before it had even started. The judge entered, the bailiff called for order, and the proceeding began. Eleanor's heart raced as the first of Langford's attorneys rose. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a voice that cut like ice. He didn't speak to Eleanor as if she were a person, he spoke at her, like she was a blemish he needed to scrub out of existence. His questions were rapid, pointed, laced with mockery just subtle enough to stay within the court's decorum but cruel enough to make the audience chuckle. "You're claiming you had knowledge of these documents, Miss Hayes? Tell me, do you even understand what a non-disclosure agreement is?" His smile was sharp, predatory. Eleanor swallowed hard, her lips barely moving. I read it." "You read it?" He leaned closer, making the words drip with disbelief. "And you expect us to believe you, a teenager, grasped its content when grown men with law degrees draft these contracts?" The courtroom rippled with low laughter. Someone muttered, "She's just a janitor's kid." Another snickered, "Probably can't even spell half the words." Eleanor's vision blurred. Her throat ached as though invisible hands were tightening around it. She wanted to speak, to stand up for herself, but the words shriveled on her tongue. She felt smaller with every heartbeat, her confidence dissolving under the weight of sneers. Marcus's fingers curled around the edge of the bench until his knuckles turned white. His chest heaved as he watched his daughter crumbling under ridicule. Memories flashed, late nights spent helping her with homework at the kitchen table, encouraging her when she doubted herself, telling her over and over that she was brighter than the world gave her credit for. He couldn't sit here, invisible, while she was mocked into silence. The lawyer pressed on, circling Eleanor like a predator closing in on wounded prey. "Tell us, then. Do you have any witnesses? Any experts? Any shred of credibility at all, Miss Hayes? Or is this nothing but the desperate rambling of a girl too foolish to know her place?" Her lips parted but no sound came. The courtroom, hungry for humiliation, leaned closer. The attorney's smirk widened, sensing victory. And then, Marcus Hayes stood. The scrape of the wooden bench as he rose echoed like a gunshot. He wasn't polished. He wasn't practiced. But his voice thundered through the chamber with a force that silenced even the chuckles. "I'll defend her!" Every head turned. The judge froze mid-note. The attorney stopped with his mouth half open. Eleanor's tear-filled eyes darted back in shock. The janitor, the man in faded work clothes, the one everyone ignored when he pushed his mop bucket through the halls, he was standing tall, fists clenched, eyes blazing with defiance. For a moment, there was complete stillness. And then whispers spread like wildfire. "Did he just say? A janitor? Defend her? This is ridiculous." The lawyer scoffed loudly. "Your Honor, surely this interruption is out of order." This man, this janitor, has no authority to speak in this court. Marcus's voice cut through him like steel. I have every authority. She's my daughter. The judge raised an eyebrow, leaning forward. Sir, are you suggesting you'll represent her? I'm not suggesting anything, Marcus said, his voice steady now, the kind of calm that comes after years of swallowing pride but never breaking spirit. I am telling you, I will defend her. Gasps filled the air. Even Langford, who until now had reclined in smug amusement, tilted his head and finally looked at Marcus as though seeing him for the first time. Eleanor whispered, trembling, Dad. Her voice was a mix of fear and hope. Marcus's gaze softened as he looked at her. You don't have to be afraid, Ellie. You're not alone. Not while I'm here. The judge, half curious, half skeptical, tapped his gavel once. This is highly unusual. Do you have any legal standing, Mr. Hayes? Marcus straightened his back, his voice calm but carrying the weight of unshakable conviction. Maybe I sweep floors in this courthouse, but don't mistake that for weakness. If nobody else will stand for her, then I will. The silence that followed was thick, charged with disbelief and tension. Spectators craned their necks, reporters scribbled furiously, and even Langford's smug confidence faltered for a split second. In that single declaration, Marcus Hayes had changed the entire room. A janitor against a billionaire. A father against an empire. And this was only the beginning. Escalating? The moment the words left his mouth, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The laughter, the condescension, the little whispers of superiority, it all dissolved into something sharper, heavier. The judge studied him with narrowed eyes, as if weighing whether this janitor's boldness was madness or courage. The attorney who had been circling Eleanor smirked, clearly smelling blood. He stepped forward with mock courtesy, his voice dripping venom masked as politeness. Your Honor, this is absurd. The man is a janitor. He doesn't hold a license, he has no right to speak in this courtroom beyond being a witness. This circus is wasting everyone's time. Marcus turned to face him slowly, his shoulders squared, his voice calm but fierce. You asked questions meant to humiliate a girl who's barely old enough to drive. You turned this into a spectacle. Don't pretend you're worried about wasting time, you just don't like the idea of her not being alone. Gasps rolled through the rows of spectators. The lawyer's smug grin wavered. He took a step closer, trying to reassert control. Sir, you are out of your depth. This is the realm of trained professionals. People who understand contracts, statutes, precedent. People who know how the world works. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his words low but carrying, every syllable coated in quiet defiance. I know exactly how the world works. Men like you think you can crush anyone without power. Men like you think a janitor's daughter doesn't deserve to be heard. That ends today. The judge tapped his gavel once, demanding order, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of intrigue. Mr. Hayes, while this court cannot formally recognize you as counsel, I will allow you to address certain matters if your daughter consents. Miss Hayes, do you wish your father to speak for you? Eleanor's lips trembled. She glanced at Marcus, his familiar, steady face, the face that had carried her through every heartbreak since her mother's passing. She nodded quickly, her voice breaking but firm. Yes. I want him to. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. The judge motioned for quiet. Very well. Proceed cautiously, Mr. Hayes. This is highly irregular, but I will permit it. The lawyer scoffed, turning to the jury and waving his arms as if to highlight the ridiculousness. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you, opposition from the janitor's closet. Shall we fetch his mop and bucket for evidence? Laughter broke out again, cruel and mocking. But this time Marcus did not flinch. He stepped forward, planting himself firmly between his daughter and the towering attorney. I don't need a bucket to clean up your lies, he said, his voice strong, unwavering. The laughter choked off abruptly. A ripple of silence followed, thick with the weight of his defiance. The judge tilted her head slightly, watching the exchange as if measuring the unexpected man standing before her. Langford, sitting tall in his immaculate suit, finally spoke for the first time, his voice smooth, deliberate, and laced with contempt. "Mr. Hayes, I admire your spirit. But this is not a playground, and your theatrics won't change the facts. Your daughter signed a document, and in my world, signatures are iron. Whether you shout or whisper, that remains the truth." Marcus turned his gaze on Langford, locking eyes with the billionaire. "In your world, maybe. In mine, a signature isn't binding when it's wrung out of fear and manipulation. A piece of paper isn't stronger than the truth, no matter how much money is printed behind it." Langford's jaw tightened, but he gave a thin smile, masking irritation with false calm. "We'll see how long your courage lasts once my attorneys tear you apart." And so it began. The questioning intensified, the lawyer unleashing a barrage of technical jargon, legal references, and condescending explanations meant to confuse and overwhelm. But Marcus didn't falter. He didn't pretend to be what he wasn't, he didn't play their game on their terms. Instead, he cut through their words with plain speech, the kind that struck at the heart of the matter. "Answer yes or no," the attorney demanded. "Did your daughter place her name on the document in question?" "Yes," Marcus said simply. "Then it is binding. There is no debate." Marcus leaned forward, his tone steady. "You skipped the most important part. How? How was she convinced? What pressure was applied? You want to talk about words on a page, but the story behind them is what matters. You want this jury to ignore the story because you know it condemns you." The lawyer blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness of his retort. The audience murmured again, louder this time. People were beginning to lean toward Marcus, to hear him more clearly, to see him not as a janitor but as a father refusing to bend. Eleanor sat straighter, her eyes glued to her dad. The trembling in her hands began to still. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "He's not backing down." But the opposition wasn't finished. The lawyer changed tactics, pressing Eleanor directly again, his voice harsher. "Miss Hayes, did your father instruct you to bring this matter to court? Did he fill your head with ideas above your station? Is this really your fight, or is this your father's anger dressed up as justice?" Eleanor's lips parted, unsure, fear creeping back in. Before she could answer, Marcus stepped in, his voice loud enough to silence the room. "Don't twist her into something she's not. This is her fight, and I'm here because she deserves not to fight it alone. Don't mistake my presence as her weakness, it's her strength." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The judge did not interrupt. The attorney clenched his jaw. The spectators watched, riveted. Langford leaned back, crossing his arms, his smile thin but eyes sharp. "You're bold, Hayes. Bold men burn out quickly under real fire." Marcus met his gaze unflinchingly. "Then let's see how hot it gets." The conflict escalated further. The lawyer pressed with exhibits, charts, and contracts, but Marcus countered with relentless questions about motive, integrity, and coercion. He forced the courtroom to see not just the black ink of signatures but the human story written in the margins, the fear of a teenager facing a corporation too powerful to say no to. And though he wasn't yet revealing the depth of his knowledge, though he was still keeping parts of himself hidden, Marcus held his ground against the sneers and the scoffs. He refused to yield an inch. The spectators, who had come expecting entertainment at the janitor's expense, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The smirks faded. Some even leaned forward with respect, captivated by the sheer audacity of this man who mopped their floors at night standing toe-to-toe with billionaires by day. By the time the session broke for recess, the room was no longer laughing. It was watching. Waiting. And Langford, though he kept his mask carefully in place, drummed his fingers once against the table, betraying just the faintest tremor of unease. The game was not going as planned. The recess ended with an air that felt different from the morning. People whispered in low tones as they returned to their seats, some stealing glances at Marcus as if he were suddenly not just a janitor in a uniform but something else entirely, something they couldn't quite name yet. Eleanor sat close to him, her small hand gripping his much larger one. She didn't say much, but her eyes carried something new, pride, maybe even belief. It was enough to give him strength. The bailiff called the court back into order. The judge returned, face composed, though her gaze seemed sharper than before, her interest in Marcus plain even if she didn't voice it. Langford leaned back in his chair, exuding a false ease. But Marcus noticed the way his fingers twitched restlessly against the table, the way his lawyers whispered more urgently to one another. Something in the balance of the room had shifted. The opposing attorney rose again, clearly determined to crush the janitor's newfound momentum. He strode forward with documents in hand, his voice louder now, meant to reclaim dominance. Let us not forget, ladies and gentlemen, this man is no attorney. He is untrained, unlicensed, and unfit to stand in this courtroom. He is trying to turn this into a sob story, to distract from the facts. His daughter signed her name, and that should end the matter. Marcus stood slowly, deliberately, meeting the attorney's eyes. His voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes from knowing the ground beneath you is finally steady. You keep repeating that line like it's the only truth in this room. Yes, she signed. But the law you claim to represent doesn't just care about the signature, it cares about the conditions under which it was taken. That's coercion. That's manipulation. That's fraud. The attorney laughed, though it rang hollow. Big words for someone who sweeps floors. Marcus let the insult hang in the air a moment, then spoke clearly, his words resonant. You want to know how I know those words? Because before I swept floors, I studied them. I sat for the bar exam. I passed it. I worked in small firms before my wife got sick and I had to walk away. I may wear this uniform now, but don't you dare think that means I forgot everything I learned. I've been cleaning up after men like you for years, one way or another. The courtroom gasped. Whispers erupted instantly, like sparks leaping into flame. He's a lawyer? Someone whispered loudly. Past the bar? The judge leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Mr. Hayes, is this true? Marcus nodded once, his gaze never leaving the attorney. Yes, Your Honor. I gave it up for my family, but I never stopped studying. Never stopped reading. Every night after shifts, every break I got, I kept the law close because I knew one day I might need it again. The attorney's confidence faltered for the first time, his words tripping. Even if that were true, he hasn't practiced in years, Your Honor. He's irrelevant. Outdated. Marcus stepped closer, pointing at the documents in the lawyer's hand. Outdated? Then explain to me why your client's contract still uses clauses outlawed by state reform 6 years ago. Why this non-disclosure agreement demands terms specifically struck down in federal court. Tell the jury why a teenager was cornered into signing something that even seasoned executives would call predatory. Outdated? No. I see exactly what you've done, and I will not let you bury her under it. The attorney's face drained of color. He flipped through his papers, scrambling for footing. The jury sat straighter, eyes now fixed on Marcus, who stood taller than the polished lawyers around him. Langford's mask of amusement cracked for the first time, his jaw clenching as he realized his carefully staged victory was slipping. He spoke finally, his voice lower, more dangerous. You think you've found something, Hayes, but contracts are interpreted, twisted, reshaped every day. My lawyers know how to bend the law. What do you have besides your anger and your janitor's pride? Marcus turned, his eyes burning with quiet fire. I have the truth. And I have the will to put it in front of everyone here until they see it too. You rely on people being too scared or too tired to fight you. Well, I'm neither. Not anymore. He began presenting evidence piece by piece, his voice steady, his pacing careful. He showed how the company had singled out Eleanor, using intimidation tactics, misleading statements, and threats to silence her. He pointed to the way Langford's executives had cornered her, promising safety for her father's job if she complied. He exposed emails, messages, and practices that painted not just negligence but deliberate cruelty. Every word struck deeper, dismantling the carefully polished image Langford had brought into the courtroom. The spectators no longer whispered mockery, they whispered awe. Reporters scribbled faster than ever, their pens racing to capture the moment when a janitor peeled back the armor of a billionaire. Eleanor's tears had dried. She watched her father with wide eyes, her chest swelling with something she hadn't felt since her mother's death: absolute, unshakable pride. She whispered softly, "That's my dad." The judge allowed Marcus to continue, fascinated by the clarity and conviction with which he spoke. The jury leaned forward, some nodding unconsciously as his words landed. The attorney tried to recover, to reframe, but Marcus met every counter with precision. He didn't bury his points under jargon. He translated them into plain truth, making the jury feel the injustice rather than just hear about it. By the time he finished, the balance of the room was no longer in question. The power Langford had wielded when he walked in had shifted. The janitor had seized it. Langford's eyes narrowed, a predator sensing real danger for the first time. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but the courtroom heard it clearly. "You don't know what you're playing with, Hayes. Men like me don't lose." Marcus looked at him steadily, unflinching. "Then today will be your first lesson." The words lingered in the air like a storm on the horizon. The session was nearing its end, but nobody moved, nobody looked away. They could all feel it. The tide had turned, and the janitor who shouted for his daughter was no longer a man to laugh at. He was the man who had just put the billionaire on the defensive. The courtroom was silent as the final day began. The tension in the air was heavy enough to choke on. Spectators filled every bench, reporters crowded the back with their notebooks and cameras, and even those who had mocked Marcus earlier now leaned forward, hungry to see how this unlikely battle would end. Eleanor sat close to her father, her small hand gripping his arm like an anchor, and though her lips trembled, her eyes carried a spark of hope that hadn't been there before. The opposing counsel rose, his face pale, his movements tighter than they had been in earlier sessions. He looked tired, cornered, his once mocking tone replaced with brittle insistence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "do not be distracted by emotional appeals. This man, this janitor, wants you to forget the plain fact. A contract was signed. We are not here to weigh feelings. We are here to weigh law." Marcus stood slowly, his uniform shirt wrinkled, his shoes scuffed from years of work, but when he lifted his head, there was no trace of defeat in his eyes. His voice filled the chamber, steady and unshaken. "Yes. We are here for the law. And the law is not meant to protect the powerful who manipulate the weak. It is meant to protect those who cannot protect themselves. My daughter was cornered, threatened, and tricked into silence. That is not law, it is abuse disguised as paperwork." The jury watched him, riveted. Some nodded. The judge, impassive but attentive, let him continue. The attorney snapped back, waving papers desperately. "Even if there were misunderstandings, the contract remains binding." Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the lawyer's words like a blade. "Binding? No contract can bind someone under duress. No agreement is valid if it is born of fear. And no signature, no matter how neat, can erase the truth that my daughter was preyed upon by men who believed their wealth and power made them untouchable." He lifted one of the documents, holding it high. "This is not a contract. It is a weapon, and today, that weapon is broken." The jury's faces shifted. Some looked visibly disturbed. Others whispered to one another. Langford finally stood, his tall frame commanding as ever, his voice low but dangerous. "Enough of this. You're a janitor, Hayes. You are nothing in my world. You think you've rattled my lawyers, exposed a few weak spots, but you will not win. Men like me don't lose." Marcus turned to him fully, his shoulders squared. "Maybe that was true until today. Maybe men like you always counted on the fact that people like me would stay silent. But I am done being silent. You looked at my daughter and thought she was small. You looked at me and saw a man in a uniform with a mop. But you forgot something." His voice rose, echoing through the chamber. "You forgot that a father will tear down mountains to protect his child." The words hit like thunder. The room buzzed with energy, spectators on the edge of their seats. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but they were no longer tears of fear. She squeezed his arm, whispering, "Dad, you're winning." The judge called for closing statements. The lawyer rattled off technicalities, his words hollow now, lacking conviction. When Marcus rose for the final time, the room fell utterly silent. He walked slowly, deliberately, placing a hand on the table where Eleanor sat. His voice softened, but carried with clarity. I don't have money. I don't have power. I don't have armies of attorneys to twist the truth until it breaks. But what I do have is a daughter. And she matters more to me than anything in this world. That's why I'm here. Not because I wanted to stand in front of all of you, not because I wanted to fight a billionaire, but because my little girl was told her voice didn't matter. And I refuse to let that be true. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the jurors. The law is supposed to be the great equalizer. It is supposed to make a janitor's daughter worth just as much as a CEO's. If you strip that away, if you let this contract stand, then justice is no longer justice. It's just another tool for the powerful to keep us silent. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, raw with emotion, and that imperfection struck harder than flawless rhetoric ever could. The jury shifted, the weight of his words settling over them like a mantle. When the judge instructed the jury to deliberate, the room emptied into restless murmurs. Hours passed. Eleanor leaned against her father, her head resting on his shoulder. He stroked her hair absent-mindedly, eyes never leaving the doors where the jury had vanished. Every second was an eternity. Finally, the jury filed back in. The foreman stood, the slip of paper in his trembling hands. The room went so silent that even the shuffling of feet seemed deafening. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And what is that verdict?" The foreman's voice wavered only slightly. "We, the jury, find in favor of Eleanor Hayes." For a heartbeat, silence. Then a roar of sound. Reporters scrambled, pens flying, flashes going off. Spectators erupted into applause, some even standing. Eleanor clutched her father's arm with a sob of relief, burying her face against him. Marcus closed his eyes, whispering, "It's over, Ellie. We did it." But the room stilled again as Victor Langford stood. He straightened his suit with deliberate calm, his face unreadable. For a long, heavy moment, he just looked at Marcus, the janitor who had brought him to his knees in front of the world. And then, he began to clap. Slow, deliberate, mocking at first, but then louder, sharper, echoing through the chamber. Everyone turned to stare, bewildered. Langford's lips curved into a cold smile, but his eyes betrayed something else, a flicker of reluctant respect. "Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned room. "Today you reminded me of something I forgot long ago. That power doesn't always live in boardrooms or bank accounts. Sometimes it lives in a father's voice." The words hung in the air, shocking, surreal. Langford turned and walked out without another glance, his entourage hurrying behind him, the clack of his shoes ringing like retreat. Eleanor looked up at her father, tears streaming, and whispered, "You beat him, Dad. You really beat him." Marcus kissed the top of her head, his arms wrapping her close. "No, sweetheart. We beat him. Together." As they walked out of the courtroom hand in hand, reporters shouted, cameras flashed, and strangers reached out to shake Marcus's hand. The janitor who once pushed a mop unseen through those very halls now walked out as a symbol of defiance, of courage, of love stronger than fear. And in that moment, everyone who had witnessed it understood the truth that would echo far beyond the courtroom. Sometimes the strongest defense doesn't come from wealth or titles, but from a parent who refuses to let their child stand alone.